Ever feel like your curiosity is leading into something bigger? For our guest, that curiosity took her around the world and eventually to owning her own firm. Today, we talk about what it actually takes to set a new standard in business and why it starts with asking the right questions. Welcome to Smart Driven Women. I'm Rona Job. Here, impactful women leaders and entrepreneurs come to share how they navigate their complex careers and personal lives. Our guest today is Courtney Matson. She is the managing partner of Broad Branch Advisors, a boutique strategy consulting firm. She brings over 20 years of experience advising clients in growth strategy, M&A, and transaction support and operational scaling. Prior to Broad Branch, Courtney led work across international development, global health, communications, and on-the-ground emergency response around the world in over a dozen countries. She is fluent in Mandarin, French, and speaks conversational Spanish. Outside of work, Courtney is usually chasing a tough HIIT workout, skiing whenever she can, cooking for friends and family, and most of all, she loves spending time with her husband and two daughters, ideally outdoors, exploring new places or in the mountains together. Courtney, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Rana.
I'm so excited to have you on. As with all of our podcast episodes, we start off with rapid fire questions. Are you ready for it?
Oh, I'm so ready. Yes.
Awesome. First up, what city do you live in and who's in your household?
I live in Washington, D.C., in the city right by the zoo. And it's me, my husband, our two girls, and of course, our rambunctious puppy.
Coffee or tea in the morning?
Coffee first, but then the afternoon usually includes tea.
What's the last book you finished?
Ooh, this one. White Oleander, which is an oldie but a goodie. And man, I read it in high school and then cried my eyes off reading it again 30 years later.
One word to describe your leadership style?
Collaborative.
Favorite app on your phone?
Ooh, Duolingo. Is that too dorky to say?
No, I love it. Is it, are you doing it every day, I'm assuming?
Every day. If I told you how many days, I mean, I might be embarrassed. It's over 2,000 days in a row.
Oh my gosh. Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Got to keep up with the languages.
Yeah.
But also chess, by the way. Did you know that?
Chess.com.
Duolingo does chess.
Oh, they do? Oh, not chess. Not like the chess app chess.
Duolingo chess. I'm trying to keep up with my 10-year-old. She's better than me. It's embarrassing.
Podcasts or audiobooks?
Both. I can't choose.
Who's a professional role model for you?
I have so many, but right now I think Michelle Obama tops the list. I'm reading and looking at her most recent picture book, which is a photography book, which reminds me just what an amazing leader and woman she is, but also one with really great style.
One cause you are passionate about?
I am currently on the board of an organization called LEDC, Latino Economic Development Center, and they are a lending institution that supports minority businesses to gain access to funding that banks and normal financial institutions wouldn't necessarily support.
Wow, amazing cause. Mountains or beach for vacation?
Ooh, this might be polarizing. Mountains.
I can kind of guess that. I could have guessed that with the skiing.
Yeah. Sorry. I know. Beach vacations, too sandy.
Best career advice you've ever received?
There is no perfect. Perfect is what you make it.
Oh, I love that. Perfect is what you make it. What trend in your industry excites you the most right now?
I'm actively not going to say AI. I think that's a common one, but I think I'm actually really excited about the next workforce. So maybe it's not a trend, but it's more the younger generation and how they're developing and adapting tools and technology that I think not only help us work better and smarter, but they are doing it in a way that they recognize they have to, because entry-level jobs are really changing.
It's really a different generation.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And just watching them sort of not just be tech native, but also like app native and software native, so different.
And creative native. They're
And creative
recognizing
native,
that
yes.
they need to have a certain level of creativity built into all of it. Otherwise, you can plug anything to AI and pump out an answer, but adding that human creativity is really maybe what makes them unique. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And they've seen and have had language that previous generations sort of have not had,
Yeah,
like,
that's a
or
really good
previous
point.
generations only in very specific industries maybe
Mm-hmm.
have had,
Mm-hmm.
like the
Yeah.
art of storytelling, right? The art of
Yeah.
standing out, but very specifically to their day to day versus, back in the day, you kind of had to be in the industry doing that day to day in
Yep.
your professional
Yep.
life to even understand what that meant.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. A new generation for sure. Well, thinking about your journey
Sure.
in our generation,
Yeah.
before your professional career journey started, did you consider yourself driven? When
Mm.
did it start? Because I consider you driven. So.
Driven's a really interesting word, right? I was noodling on this a little bit before our conversation. And like, what does it mean to be driven, right? And driven in what way? I think I sometimes back away from the term driven
Mhm.
because it feels egocentric, and maybe there's a part of me that feels like, oh wait, am I a driven woman? I don't know what that means. I think I'm a curious,
Mhm.
inquisitive person, and that creates a lot of the drive that you see in my career and my bio and some of the things that I've done so far in life. But I think a lot of it isn't necessarily spurred by this very specific drive that I have, but rather just a curiosity, and a sort of interest in problem solving.
I feel like men and women define driven so differently.
Yeah.
And every time I have this conversation with a woman that's always redefining what driven kind of is, or being very specific about what driven is, because it's not what they associate it with. It's
Yeah.
not how they see
Mm-hmm.
it, because driven for them looks differently from
Different.
what they have seen, maybe. And granted, we've seen driven from a specific lens
Yeah. Yeah.
growing up, even.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very
Yeah.
different from today's
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah. The model's different too, right? Or maybe
Yeah.
there isn't a model. I think that's kind of an interesting, we're kind of building it as we
Yeah.
go.
Well, when did the curiosity start that became that drive for you?
Um, So I think what originally oriented me to some of the service work that I've done that's been really core to who I am as a person probably started in high school. Um, Very long story short, I was doing an internship at the Gay Men's Health Crisis, which is an organization based out of New York City. It's an AIDS advocacy organization, and this was in the 90s, late 90s. And, HIV/AIDS was still very much a big part of the conversation. It still, in
Mhm.
some places, is now. But I was really compelled to it. I don't know why. I can't explain what it was. And so I organized a big fundraiser at my school. We did the AIDS Walk New York together as a team at my school. And my parents sat me down one night. I haven't actually told the story in a really long time, so it's funny you're bringing it up. But my parents sat me down the night before the big walk, and we had like 250 kids going. We were getting to bust into New York City. I lived right outside of the city. We had raised like $50,000. It was a big deal. And my parents said, "Why are you so passionate about this?" And I was like, "I don't know. I just feel this really specific calling to this." And they sat me down and said, "We have to tell you something. Your grandfather died of HIV back in the early 80s." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And they said, "Yeah, your grandfather had gotten a blood transfusion in the early 80s before they tested blood for, you know,
Mhm.
diseases and various things. And he contracted HIV. And as a result, very unfortunately, obviously died prematurely, much younger than he
Mhm.
should have, and also with a lot of stereotype associated with it because he wasn't a gay man or an injection drug user or any of these kind of typical stereotypes that were really common in the early 80s. But he was just, a guy who unfortunately needed a blood transfusion and got a bad one.
Mhm.
And that was such an interesting moment for me, because I was like, how did I didn't know that story. I didn't have that direct connection, but just something about that activism felt really near and dear to my heart. And I think that's something that has really driven me forward, with all of the causes that I support, the service work that I do, and even kind of the way I try to live my life as a person in the world. So yeah, I don't know.
Wow. Wow, that just gave me goosebumps.
Kind of an interesting story.
Yeah, yeah. Well, after high school and on to college, did you find yourself drawn to causes? I saw that you went into nonprofit immediately after college, it looks like,
Yeah.
but did you do anything during college that kind of spurred that?
So I really kept up with the sort of global health advocacy piece. So that HIV/AIDS thread followed me through college. I did a lot of work there, on HIV/AIDS globally. So that's when I started getting that international development itch. And that carried me through much of my career, actually. But yeah, I just felt like, man, I was lucky to be born in this life that I was born in, to a family that took care of me, and not into, a place where I didn't have access to resources or tools or basic health and safety. And so I think that drove a lot of what my college career included. Definitely wanted to spend a lot of time abroad, and then did some advocacy work in a nonprofit for 3 or 4 years after school, and then went to USAID, which unfortunately we have to say a quick prayer for, because it doesn't exist
Quick
anymore.
Moment of silence.
A moment of silence for the Agency for International Development. But what an incredible tool that the US government had at the time to be able to utilize its soft power for development efforts. And so that took me all over the world. And I feel so grateful to have spent time in South Africa and Colombia and Indonesia, Philippines, China, all over the place, kind of focusing on exactly. Focusing on that. And obviously it expanded beyond just global health. We did a lot of different development work, but that idea of not just giving a handout to people, but also helping lift them up by their bootstraps and helping them to help themselves. And that's been, I think, at the core of a lot of the work that I do in nonprofits and on boards, etc. That's carried me through.
Amazing story. And prior to getting into USAID, what sort of spurred that continuous learning, curiosity, growth? And I mean, even just the decision to join USAID, knowing that you'd be likely sent all around the world to the front lines of various diseases.
So, I think this was in 08, 09, where, we were in a big recession. I was working at this nonprofit that was receiving Gates funding, and we didn't lose our funding, but we were basically told, that funding that you have for 2 years, well, you're going to need to make it last for 5. And we were like, ooh, okay, how do we do that? And so, even though our programming continued and I was really proud of the work that we did, I realized how easy it was to get hamstrung by that funding, that lack of funding. And so I was like, where do I go where there's consistent, solid funding for international development? And that's why I looked to USAID. And again, we're at a different point in time now. So I just want to recognize that this was almost 20 years ago. But that was what drew me to USAID. I remember having spent time abroad and seeing, the USAID logos in some of the developing countries I had been to. And that's where I was like, I gotta get there. Help me figure out how to get in. And I reached out to all my friends, all my neighbors, my parents' friends. I was like, does anyone know of a job? And I took, a low-level job as a contractor for USAID as my first gig. And I was just like, I'll do anything. I just want to get in. And, then almost a decade later, I left in 2017, but, left having been all over the world and having had a chance to really see through so much of the really cool programming that the agency did. And I was really proud of. We stood up the Global Development Lab, which was like an incubator for new technology ideas that help smooth kind of the development uptake for
Mhm.
so many places. I was seconded to the Ebola task force, which was a really
Mm.
intense but incredible experience. I worked in the Office of Afghanistan, Pakistan Affairs. So just a whole bunch of experiences that were really, really cool and exciting.
So from China, Indonesia, India, the Philippines, Colombia, Liberia, Guinea, Sierra Leone,
Sierra
South
Leone.
Africa,
Yeah.
Lesotho, Afghanistan, Pakistan, France, and UK, like just so many countries. I'm sure you've met lots of women in those countries. What is the kind of common theme, or maybe is there sort of like a common thread that you've seen happening in women and how they are maybe raising their families, or
Yeah.
how they're maybe thinking about even, jobs and careers and stuff? Although I granted it's like so many different types of countries. I'm curious.
I mean, this is apropos because we're recording shortly after Mother's Day, but I mean, women in general, but specifically mothers, I think and mothers can look a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be a biological mother, a nurturing figure, are some of the most thoughtful, nurturing, selfless people I have ever met. And when you combine that with a little knowledge and a little engagement and activism, holy cow, you can get some really, really powerful women. And, I don't want to get political on this podcast, but I think when you think about what our opportunity is going forward, the thing that I try to at least teach my children who are 8 and 10, so they're in second and fourth grade, is, it's not just about putting your mind to it or being educated. It's about bringing that enthusiasm, that drive, like what you
Mm-hmm.
talked about earlier. That's what really stands out and makes the difference. And I'll just hope you don't mind, I give a really quick
No.
example. Because my older daughter just started ski racing this year. And just by the way, if you want to find a sport that is extremely onerous and expensive and takes up all of your time and your family's time, ski racing is the right way to do it.
I will say I have been incredibly, incredibly impressed with your weekend schedule and how y'all make that happen.
It's intense. But all of this to say, so my 10-year-old, she's in fourth grade. She played soccer and did piano and all of these other things. But when she got onto this ski racing team, she didn't know a single person on the team. She was the youngest kid in the program. No one went to her school. No one was from where she was from. But this girl was just driven by that activity. And we would wake up at 5 o'clock every Saturday and Sunday morning. She would do it without a single complaint, get into her long underwear, grab her peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We get in the car, we'd go. She'd be up before the sun was even up on the mountain. And that's kind of that's the thing that I want to share with my children, but also, help your children find those things. Because when you find those things that really give you that passion, that drive, that's what it's all about. And I think that's what makes each of us sing, right? That's why we're sitting here talking right now today. So I know that's a little bit of a tangent, but it's just the perfect example. And now, of course, we're stuck doing this for God knows how long.
It's a perfect tangent. I was going to ask you, actually, if 30 years from now somebody asked your daughter, does she consider herself driven? Do you think she would give a similar answer to you, or do you think she'd be like, oh yeah, absolutely, like whatever that means, whatever that definition is?
I think I'd like to think so, right? And I think I try to show her with my actions, not just with my words, how important that is. For us, being the CEO of my company now, which we could talk about, is just part of my identity. It's not the everything of my identity. And it's so important to also be there for my family and be there to, participate in the daily dog walking and the poop picking up and, all of the things that make us the whole humans that we are. I think that's what makes that whole person. And, when you have that drive and that authenticity, I think it's visible.
Yeah. The move from USAID, what did that look like? What did the decision making look like? What did it look like for you and your family and everything?
This was my big pivot. In 2017, I was pregnant with my second daughter. and I had been speaking on a panel from my undergraduate alma mater, Middlebury College, on careers and different things. And so I was representing careers in the Foreign Service.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another gentleman who was representing careers in consulting. And after our panel, we got in a friendly banter about the merits of our respective careers and whatnot. And he said to me, very good natured, by the way, you shouldn't be in the government. You're a consultant. You have a consultant's mind. You're a problem solver. You're creative. You're thoughtful. You shouldn't be doing the same thing over and over. And I was like, ha ha ha. I've got this career job that I can't get fired from. Famous last words. I recognize, knowing what we know now. But I was like, you're so silly. Come on. And then over the course of the next 6 months, we had lunch, we had coffee a bunch of times, and he convinced me to come over to this tiny little strategy consulting firm that A, I'd never heard of, B, I didn't actually understand what they do, and C, I was like, wait, what? You want me to come over here? But I said, if not now, when?
Mm-hmm.
This is a cool opportunity. I'm jumping into the deep end into something I don't know at all, but I'm really excited about. I did lead strategy at USAID on a country level. So I kind of understood the core thesis and kind of, the underpinnings behind this. Obviously, the clientele was very different.
Yeah.
Our clients were basically country governments. Right. And in this case, they were working with corporate and commercial clients globally. But I said, I think I can do something here. And now here we are 9 years later. By the way, I came in 7 months pregnant. So they were also like, what are we going to do with you here? So I wrote their maternity leave policy and their handbook, and I worked for 2 months. Had my second daughter, came back after 2 months and said, okay, so what do we do here? how do we get this started? And long story short, I now am the managing partner. I run the firm, and we actually recently completed a managed buyout. So last year, actually around this time last year, myself and my 3 partners bought the business from that very gentleman, John, and the other founder, and so we now own it.
I still remember the evening. We had a little toast.
Yeah, we did.
To the buyout. Right. So congratulations again.
Thank
Very
you.
exciting.
Thank you. Yeah.
Amazing story, Courtney. I mean, I love that. I want to ask about what parallels you're seeing with the frameworks being used in consulting and also the frameworks being used when you're doing global work that's not necessarily for a for-profit company. The reason I ask is a lot of our listeners are also navigating switches between industries. And sometimes it's from working in government or working in nonprofits, and they're going to another company, like ours, that are more towards consulting, more towards client leading, which is different, but the same.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the tools and technology that are available to us now have definitely alleviated the burden associated with learning everything in a specific industry. And so I think the focus is much more on that creative problem solving, that, coming at a query or a question or a problem statement with a new way of thinking, not just I have very specific expertise in X, right? There's so many ways to gain that expertise. And in our world specifically, our focus is on the external. So we're going out and talking to experts to gain their perspective on how they see the world. So it's less about what I know specifically and more about, like you're doing right now, asking the right questions and pulling the threads that really matter so that we can say, what does this mean and how do we translate that into, that which is meaningful to the client? So I think that's kind of the core fundamentals. And then I think as it relates to everything, I love a little, like a stool kind of a vision or framework, right? Where it's never just the one thing, right? It's about being, as a person, it's about being that whole person. So someone who has incredible expertise is great, but if they're not thoughtful and they're not creative and they're not hungry for what, they're looking for, that's not necessarily, at least for us, an attractive hire, for example, in our firm. And I would say the same for, nonprofits. I would say the same for small organizations, right? Having that ability to be kind of more like a three-legged stool, right? Like having that triple
Mm-hmm.
prong approach, I think is really helpful as it balances a lot of those core, pieces with maybe other, valuable things. So,
Yeah.
I mean, all of that just to say, I don't think anyone is singular. I don't think any business is singular, and having that variability in approach or product line offering, or even just skill set and interest, I think makes people more dynamic, makes businesses more dynamic, but also makes them long-term, I think, smarter and more resilient.
Yeah. A holistic view, so to speak.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Yeah. How do you see the next generation sort of their ability to see these parallels with what makes a good consultant and what makes a good
Yeah.
human being and what makes us creative, especially in the age of AI?
Yeah, I love that question. So I was recently at this women's retreat, and we went to Zion. And we were hiking in the mountains and doing all of these, excursions that were really exciting and a little bit scary, and kind of pushing the boundaries of what we all thought we could do. And by the way, I didn't know any of these women. There were 11 of us total. So I walked in having never met these 10 other people, and I walked out 72 hours later with this incredible group of friends. And what I realized about this retreat, looking back on it, was the idea, they were all women CEOs, essentially, executive women. What I realized was so much of what built us, but what challenges each of us, is the lack of a model, right? I don't feel like growing up I necessarily had the perfect boss or perfect mentor who embodied all of the things that I want to be as a person and also what I looked up to. And so as a result, I feel like I've been cobbling it together without having that perfect model. And so when I think about the next generation, I don't necessarily know that I'm that, but I think there are more better models for how to do this the right way. And to me, the right way is not necessarily don't make any mistakes, right? There is no perfect, as I said before,
Right.
But it's about saying, like, take the humanness that this person is and apply that with the capabilities they have, and add to that the things that maybe this other person has also brought to the table, to create a better vision for what that looks like. And I certainly hope that the next generation of leaders, the future leaders of our country, of the world, of businesses, take that. It's not just about being the perfect exemplar of a CEO, but rather taking someone with all of their humanness, right? All of their humanity and their skill sets and their flaws, and being able to kind of cobble together a model of what can be. So that's
not to lead you into
Oh.
a question or anything, or not to give you a leading question, I should say. I feel like as I'm listening to you describe this, I can kind of imagine what your dinner conversations sound like with your daughters.
Totally. Well, it's funny. My older daughter, I've been talking about her a lot, but she's in a robotics team, and she's doing this problem solving on how do you get the robot to do the thing. And like, I obviously don't know the answer. I have no programming abilities and no robotics skills, but it's sort of like, well, like, what has worked, right? What are the different types of things that you can see that have worked, and how do you apply that to the lens of how do you make this work? Because ultimately, maybe you're the first one solving the problem, right? Maybe it's a problem that's never been solved before. So it's not about saying, how do we copy X? How do we do it just like someone else did? But rather, how do you take what you've learned from all of these different places and apply it in this context to solve a new problem?
Yeah. You have an amazingly busy schedule as a CEO, as a leader of your organization. And I know your husband also has a busy and full schedule with his career as well. What are some prioritization strategies that you both work on or practice that some of our listeners might love to learn from?
Imperfection is definitely the name of the game here, because it varies every day. But we really try to have family time every evening. So with almost without exception, we eat dinner together every single night. And sometimes that's problematic because I get hungry at like 5 o'clock. And then my kids don't come home till 7:15 or 7:30, and I'm like, let's eat right now. But we eat dinner together every single night with very few exceptions, and kind of do our bedtime routine together. Yeah, that's a big.
We do the dinner
one.
every night too, almost every night actually.
Yeah, it's
harder.
Like a really good grounding exercise. It's harder as they get older, but
it is much harder as they get older. But
and I need snacks. Like I keep snacks because I can't wait till 7:30. Weekends are big reset times for us, so I try not to program everything both days. Ski season, that's really hard.
Season, I was going to ask,
you know, about, but to the extent possible, trying to keep some space for kind of recalibration and prepping for the week, because boy, every week is a logistical nightmare, right?
Yeah, it's not going to be perfect, but also make time for a reset.
Yeah,
I like that framework.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear what advice you have for any listeners that could potentially be a mentee to you or would want to someday follow in your footsteps and go into consulting or go into private work.
Yeah. I think it goes back to a little bit what I said earlier. I don't think there is a perfect model. And so I always fear when someone kind of like puts you on a pedestal and thinks that you're that perfect exemplar. I just don't believe that it exists. And I think it's different for everyone.
Yeah.
The best boss I have ever had said to me once, like, I don't know how to do this. So you and I are going to need to sit down and figure it out together. And the best thing about this is that I trust you and you trust me, and we're going to just have to work it together. And this was like a big, scary problem that was, you know, coming at us head first. Yeah. And the fact that they had the humility to say, I don't know what the answer is, but I trust you to work with me and we're going to figure it out together, not only made me feel like they're really human, right? But also it gave me ownership in that problem space. And I think that was the most amazing part of it. So this was the Ebola task force, right? And we were confronting all of these things first time, right? Head on. And so she and I just worked together and we figured it out. And, you know, was it perfect? Absolutely not. But I think that sort of building and iterating and looking for different places and spaces where we could pull exemplars of what's worked in different contexts was what made us succeed. And, you know, it was a big project, but it ultimately, you know, helped with the Ebola response and recovery efforts in 2016, 2017.
What's that saying? Perfection is the enemy of progress.
Yeah. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
Something like this. Yeah. Exactly.
I love that. Yeah. Well, Courtney, thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, we could talk for hours, I think. Hours.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, we could.
Even, you know, just frameworks and then motherhood and all of it and schedules.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you coming on here so much and sharing your knowledge, sharing your insights, sharing your approach to everybody listening. For those who are listening and would love to connect with Courtney, you can find her on LinkedIn. You can connect with her there and message her about the different organizations that she's a part of, which we'll include in our podcast description.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Rona.